We always imagine medieval castles as impregnable strongholds, where lords and kings enjoy exquisite feasts in huge halls to the sound of lutes. We see luxurious tapestries, the glitter of golden cups, and endless lines of servants carrying roasted swans and exotic pâtés.
Careful with these.
However, behind this facade of idleness and wealth lay a completely different reality, which chroniclers preferred to keep silent about. It was a world where the air was scorching hot, and silence was considered an unaffordable luxury, inaccessible to anyone present. Here, far from the eyes of the noble guests, a daily battle for survival unfolded, where the enemy was the very element of fire and backbreaking labor.
Not like that.
The people who worked here were part of a complex mechanism, a failure of which could cost not just a meal, but a life. Their work was invisible to the lords, but it was on them that the well-being and safety of the entire court depended. Watch the video to the end to find out how architects turned kitchens into fireproof bunkers and what deadly price cooks paid for the right to feed the king. What if I told you that everything you believed about the primitiveness of medieval construction is not true? Medieval kitchens, especially in large royal residences, were engineering marvels of their time, designed with incredible care. They were not cramped rooms with a hearth in the middle, as often depicted in films, but monumental freestanding structures. Architects understood that the kitchen was the main source of fire hazard for the entire castle complex. Therefore, these buildings were often constructed of stone and located outside the main residential block, connected to it only by a covered gallery. Such isolation ensured that if the kitchen caught fire, the flames would not spread to the living quarters in the Great Hall. Inside, these rooms were impressive in size, with high vaulted ceilings reaching far upward, creating the feeling of being in a cathedral. Such height was necessary not for beauty, but so that the accumulated heat and smoke could rise as high as possible. The walls were made incredibly thick to keep the heat inside in winter and keep the food cool in summer. The windows were located high under the roof, providing ventilation, but preventing direct sunlight from spoiling the supplies. Stone was the only reliable material capable of withstanding round-the-clock exposure to high temperatures and open flames. The floor was laid with stone slabs or compacted earth to eliminate any possibility of fire from fallen coal. Giant hearths were located in the center or around the perimeter, large enough to roast an entire bull. These fireplaces were so huge that several people could stand inside them without touching the ceiling of the firebox with their heads. The chimney system was a complex labyrinth of channels designed to effectively remove combustion products to the outside. However, even such a powerful extractor fan often could not cope with the volume of smoke produced when cooking for hundreds of people. Therefore, the upper part of the building was often crowned with a special structure, a lantern with adjustable louvers. This allowed the airflow to be controlled, creating a draft similar to that used in industrial furnaces. An interesting feature was the drainage system, which was laid at the foundation stage. The huge amount of water used for washing and cooking required effective drainage to avoid unsanitary conditions. The channels were laid under the floor and led outside the castle walls, often into a moat. This prevented moisture and dirt from accumulating inside the room, which was critical for keeping food fresh. Even in those days, it was understood that cleanliness in the kitchen was essential for the health of the castle's inhabitants. Engineers used sloping floors to allow water to flow naturally into gutters, making cleaning easier. The shape of the building itself was often unusual: round, octagonal, or square with a pyramidal roof. The famous kitchen at Glastonbury Abbey, for example, was octagonal in shape with four-corner fireplaces. This geometry contributed to better heat distribution and more efficient ventilation of the entire space. In the center of the roof was an opening through which the hottest air escaped, creating a constant flow of fresh air from below. This was an ingenious solution that allowed acceptable working conditions to be maintained even in the height of summer heat. The builders took into account the wind rose so that smoke from the kitchen would not be carried into the windows of the master's quarters. Lighting in such huge halls was scarce, as the windows were located too high and were often closed with shutters. The main source of light was the fire in the hearths, casting long dancing shadows on the walls. The corners and utility rooms were in semi-darkness, dispelled only by the dim light of oil lamps or torches. This created a special, gloomy atmosphere, far from the festive splendor of the banquet hall. Cooks had to work almost by touch, relying on experience and intuition to determine when dishes were ready. Smoke accumulating under the ceiling further obscured visibility, creating a constant haze. The huge oak tables for cutting and serving were so heavy that they could not be moved. Their tabletops, as thick as a palm, were pockmarked with knife and axe marks, evidence of decades of continuous use. The shelves along the walls were bursting with copper and clay pots and pans, the size of which matched the scale of the cooking. Everything in this kitchen was large, heavy, and sturdy, designed to last for centuries. It was a realm of stone, metal, and fire, created to meet the castle's basic need for food. We would love to hear your thoughts. What do you think about such monumental approaches to the construction of utility rooms in the past? Write about it in the comments, and be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next episodes. Are you ready to learn the truth about what it really meant to maintain a fire in a medieval castle? Fire was the cook's main tool, but it was also his most dangerous and unpredictable neighbor. There were no thermostats or gas regulators in the kitchens. The temperature was controlled solely by the amount and type of firewood. To maintain the desired heat, whole tree trunks were used, which were specially harvested in the castle forests. The hearths were so large that they were used not just for fires, but for real walls of fire that provided even heat. The ability to control this flame was an art that was valued no less than the ability to prepare complex sauces. Cooks had to know the properties of different types of wood in order to choose the right fuel for each dish. Hardwoods such as oak or beech provided long and even heat, ideal for roasting large carcasses. Softwoods burned faster, providing the high-temperature flash needed for boiling water or quick frying. A mistake in choosing firewood could hopelessly ruin expensive meat or leave guests without a hot meal. Fuel supplies were stored in special dry rooms, as wet wood produced too much smoke. The logistics of delivering firewood were continuous, with carts of logs arriving at the kitchen daily. The process of cooking on spits required constant and monotonous rotation of heavy carcasses over the fire. For this purpose, complex mechanical devices with a system of weights and counterweights were used. These mechanisms had to be regularly lubricated and serviced so that they would not jam at the most crucial moment. Sometimes the rotation was carried out manually by adult servants who stood for hours by the red-hot furnace. Their work was one of the hardest and lowest paid in the kitchen hierarchy. The monotony of this work was maddening, and the heat drained all their strength. In addition to open fires, closed ovens were also used for baking bread and pies. These ovens were brick domes that were preheated to the required temperature. Then the coals were raked out and dough was placed inside, which was baked by the heat accumulated in the walls. The temperature inside such an oven was determined without instruments, for example, by the color of the bricks or by throwing in a handful of flour. An experienced baker could determine the moment when the bread should be put in with an accuracy of 1 degree. Any mistake would result in the batch of bread for the entire garrison being ruined. The danger of fire meant that buckets of water and sand, as well as large pieces of wet felt cloth, had to be kept at the ready. If the fat dripping from the meat caught fire, it could cause the fire to spread instantly throughout the room. Cooks constantly monitored the trays where the fat dripped, emptying them in time. Sparks flying out of the chimney posed a threat to the thatched roofs of neighboring buildings in the courtyard. Therefore, special chimney sweeps monitored the condition of the chimneys, regularly cleaning them of soot. But even with all the precautions, kitchens burned more often than other buildings. Fire control required round-the-clock duty, as it was impractical to completely extinguish the fires. At night, the flames were smothered by covering the coals with ash, so that they could be quickly rekindled in the morning. A special guard made sure that the coals did not go out and cause trouble while the others slept. This was the firekeeper, whose responsibility was enormous and whose sleep was light and intermittent. The morning in the kitchen began long before dawn with the rekindling of these coals. This is how the continuous cycle of life in the castle, dependent on the elements, was maintained. Fire was used not only for cooking, but also for heating huge boilers with water for household needs. Hot water was necessary for washing greasy dishes, laundry, and cleaning rooms. These boilers hung on massive chains or stood on tripods directly in the flames. Carrying boiling water in buckets created additional risks of scalding for clumsy workers. The steam from the cauldrons mixed with the smoke, creating a heavy, humid atmosphere that was difficult to breathe in. Taming fire was the basis of the culinary craft, the foundation on which everything else rested. Without the skill of stokers and firemen, even the most exquisite ingredients would remain raw. It was rough, physical, but vital work that demanded respect for the elements. Fire was a friend that could turn into a merciless enemy at any moment. How was it possible to maintain the strictest hierarchy and order in such conditions?
Faster.
What if I showed you a time machine that would transport us to the management structure of a medieval kitchen? Forget chaos. The kitchen was organized more strictly than an army unit before battle. At the top of this pyramid was not the head chef, but a high-ranking official, the clerk of the kitchen. This person was responsible for purchasing, budgeting, and quality control, with the power to punish and reward. He didn't get his hands dirty with flour, but he decided what would be served to the king and how many coins would be spent. His word was law, and even the head chef bowed to his authority. Under the clerk was the head chef, or Magister Kokum, a respected and highly paid figure. He was the strategist, developing the menu and overseeing the preparation of the most complex dishes. He was rarely seen with a knife in his hand doing the dirty work. He tasted, gave instructions, and monitored the aesthetics of the presentation. The Magister wore clean clothes and often carried his own staff or large spoon as a symbol of authority. He was the creator and conductor of this noisy, hot orchestra. His skill determined the reputation of the entire house and could bring the favor or wrath of the suzerain. Below him in the hierarchy was an army of assistants and apprentices who did the main physical work. They chopped meat, kneaded huge amounts of dough, cleaned vegetables, and tended the fire. Their work was hard and thankless, but it gave them a chance to climb the career ladder one day. Training took place directly in the workplace, through observation and carrying out the master's instructions. Mistakes were not forgiven, but diligence could be noticed and rewarded with a promotion. This apprenticeship system ensured the continuity of knowledge and traditions. A special caste was made up of people responsible for the supply and storage of food, storekeepers and purchasers. They kept strict records of every sack of flour and every barrel of wine, protecting the supplies from theft. In conditions where food was the main currency, their honesty and attentiveness were worth their weight in gold. Access to the storerooms was restricted to a limited circle of people, and the keys were always kept by the person in charge. Theft in the kitchen was severely punished, even leading to expulsion or imprisonment. It was an area of strict accountability and constant inventory checks. At the very bottom of the hierarchy were the dishwashers, wood and water carriers, who did the dirtiest work. They carried out the ashes, scraped the boilers with sand, and washed the floors after cooking. Their names rarely appeared in the chronicles, but without their labor, the kitchen would simply have sunk into filth. They worked the hardest, earned the least, and lived in the most modest conditions. Nevertheless, even for them, service in the castle was a guarantee of food and shelter. Often, people from nearby villages were taken on for these jobs as part of their labor obligations. Discipline in the kitchen was maintained by harsh methods, including fines and physical punishment. Shouting and swearing were a familiar background noise, drowning out the sound of boiling pots and crackling fires. Absolute synchronization was required to ensure that hundreds of dishes were ready at the same time. Any delay in one link would disrupt the entire schedule for serving dishes to the dining room. This tension created an atmosphere of constant stress in which people lived for years. However, despite the hard work, the kitchen staff was a close-knit community with its own traditions. They ate together, rested together during rare moments of calm, and protected each other from external threats. There was a certain pride in belonging to a team capable of feeding the royal court. A successful feast was their shared victory, which they celebrated by eating the leftovers of the sumptuous dishes. This sense of camaraderie helped them survive the harsh conditions of medieval service. On holidays, the kitchen turned into a theater where everyone played their part in a grand performance. Cooks decorated dishes with gold foil, feathers, and intricate dough structures. Food was not only meant to satisfy hunger, but also to entertain, amaze, and demonstrate the wealth of the host. The ability to create a show out of the presentation of a dish was valued no less than its taste. And behind the scenes of this show was iron discipline and a clear hierarchy of professionals. This is how this complex machine worked, where every cog knew its place and function. From the clerk to the dishwasher, everyone was united by one goal: to feed the lords and survive themselves. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new videos about the secrets of history. Guess how long it took to create a water supply system for a single kitchen? Water was the lifeblood of the kitchen, needed in enormous quantities for cooking and cleaning. Large castles had complex systems of aqueducts and lead pipes that delivered water directly to the building. It was an engineering marvel that eliminated the endless running back and forth with buckets to the well in the courtyard. Storage tanks were located on the upper levels of the towers, creating the necessary pressure in the pipes. However, the use of lead carried a hidden threat that was not yet known at the time. Where there was no water supply, there were water carriers, whose work was extremely hard. They spent the whole day running between the source and the kitchen with heavy buckets on their yokes. Water was needed for boilers, for washing vegetables, for kneading dough, and for constant hand washing. The purity of the water was strictly controlled, as dirty water could spoil the taste of food. Special filters made of cloth or sand were used to remove mechanical impurities. A separate person was responsible for monitoring the quality of the water and ensuring its safety. Boiling water was the only available method of disinfecting dishes and utensils. Huge boilers with boiling water constantly bubbled on the fire, ready to receive greasy plates and knives. Dishwashing took place in several stages, using ash and sand as abrasives. It was hard physical labor and clouds of hot steam that corroded the skin of the hands. Dishwashers worked in conditions of high humidity, which often led to rheumatism. In winter, the water problem was exacerbated by the freezing of pipes and sources in the castle courtyard. Snow or ice had to be melted, which required a huge amount of additional fuel. Water carriers had to break the ice in the wells and drag buckets across the slippery stones of the courtyard. This slowed down the work in the kitchen and created additional difficulties for all the staff. Every drop of water in winter became a precious commodity that was carefully preserved and used sparingly. The struggle for water was a daily battle with nature. Interestingly, rainwater was also collected from the roofs in special tanks for technical needs. It was considered soft and well-suited for washing kitchen towels and aprons. The gutter system on the roof was designed to collect precipitation as efficiently as possible. However, spring or well water was preferred for drinking and cooking. The division of water into technical and food was already the norm in large households at that time. Some castles even had something resembling taps, bronze bushings that allowed the flow to be regulated. This was the height of technical progress at the time, available only to the wealthiest lords. Such devices were carefully maintained, regularly cleaned, and lubricated with grease to ensure smooth operation. Having running water in the kitchen was a source of pride for the owner and envy for the neighbors. It significantly sped up the process of preparing food for feasts. The humidity in the kitchen was very high due to the constant use of water and steam. This affected the preservation of food, forcing dry supplies to be stored in separate, well-ventilated rooms. The walls were covered with condensation, which dripped down, creating slippery puddles on the floor. Combating dampness was as important a task as maintaining the fire. Sawdust or straw on the floor helped absorb excess moisture, preventing falls. Water was the source of life for the kitchen, but it could also cause the walls and foundation to deteriorate. Therefore, special attention was paid to waterproofing during construction, using clay locks and lead gaskets. Architects understood that water wears away stone, especially under conditions of constant use. The reliability of the water supply and drainage system was the key to the longevity of the entire kitchen building. Without water, the fire in the hearths would be useless. The organization of water management required careful planning and constant monitoring by the managers. Water shortages could disrupt the most important banquet and disgrace the lord of the castle. Therefore, the condition of wells and pipes was monitored as carefully as the fortress walls. Water was the hidden but powerful engine of all kitchen production. And how did they cope with heavy equipment in the next chapter? In medieval kitchens, there was no place for lightweight aluminum or non-stick coatings. Cast iron, and copper reigned supreme. Kitchen utensils were made to last for centuries and weighed accordingly, requiring extraordinary physical strength from the cooks. Huge pots for cooking meat could weigh dozens of kilograms, even when empty. And with water and food, their weight became unliftable. Special swivel cranes mounted in the walls of fireplaces were used to move such utensils. These were sturdy iron structures that allowed the cauldron to be moved into the fire and back without the risk of straining one's back. But even with their help, handling the utensils required the efforts of several men. Frying pans and roasting pans had long iron handles so that the cook could hold them without burning himself on the flame. These handles also added weight and shifted the center of gravity, making working with them a real athletic exercise. Copper pots and saucepans had to be regularly tinned, coated with tin on the inside to avoid copper oxide poisoning. This process required the services of professional tinsmiths who regularly visited the castle kitchen. Shiny copper hanging on the walls was a sign of wealth and good housekeeping. Caring for such a collection of cookware took hours of daily labor by the servants. Mortars and pestles, necessary for grinding spices and preparing minced meat, were often made of stone or cast bronze. Some mortars were so large that they stood on the floor and reached the waist of an adult. Working with a heavy pestle was monotonous and exhausting, requiring the endurance of a marathon runner. It was in these mortars that the famous medieval sauces and pastes, which required perfect consistency, were created. The sound of the pestle striking the mortar was a constant rhythm that the kitchen lived to. Horsehair or fabric sieves stretched over wooden hoops were used to strain broths and sauces. These devices were lightweight but required frequent replacement and thorough washing. The household also had dozens of wooden spoons, spatulas, and bowls, which wore out quickly and needed to be replaced. Barrels for salting, tubs for water, and troughs for dough took up all the free space along the walls. Wood absorbed odors, so strictly defined containers were used for different products. The cutting tables were made of solid oak planks that could withstand the blows of a butcher's axe. Their surface was regularly scraped with knives, removing the top layer of wood along with dirt and grease. This was the only way to thoroughly clean the work surface at that time. Over time, the tabletops became concave from constant scraping, preserving traces of millions of meals prepared. These tables were witnesses to and participants in the culinary history of the castle. The inventory also included complex mechanisms such as cheese or oil presses. They consisted of heavy stones, wooden screws, and levers that allowed excess moisture to be squeezed out. Operating these presses required an understanding of mechanics and precision. The inventory was kept in strict order, with each item having its own place on a hook or shelf. The loss or damage of a tool was considered a serious breach of discipline. Kitchen inventory was taken regularly, and lists of utensils were recorded in special logbooks. Copper cauldrons and silver dishes were part of the Lord's treasury. They were cherished and repaired until the very end. Old leaky dishes were not thrown away, but melted down to make new items. It was a closed cycle of metal use, where nothing was wasted. Saving resources was an important feature of medieval economy. Working with such equipment shaped a special type of people, physically strong, resilient, and meticulous. A cook was not just a chef, but also a blacksmith of his own happiness in the truest sense of the word, working with iron and fire. His hands were accustomed to the weight, heat, and cold steel of a knife. Utensils were an extension of his hands, a tool of power over food. The weight of the metal was the price to pay for the reliability and durability necessary to feed an entire garrison. These items outlived their creators and owners, serving many generations of people. They bore the marks of time and the hard work that went into every meal. But even the strongest metal could not protect against the hidden threat of poisoning, which will be discussed further. Are you ready for the shocking truth about why food was a matter of national security? In an era of palace intrigue and power struggles, the kitchen became the #1 strategic target. Poisoning the king was much easier and safer than killing him in open combat or sending an assassin. Therefore, security measures in the royal kitchen resembled those of a secret military facility. Every stage of food preparation, from receiving ingredients to serving, was strictly controlled by trusted individuals. There was a complex ritual called credence, or testing for faith, designed to guarantee the safety of the dishes. Special people, tasters, were required to taste each dish before it left the kitchen. It was a deadly dangerous job, but it was well paid and gave high status at court. Not only food was tasted, but also wine, water, salt, and even bread served at the table. If the taster remained alive and well after a while, the dish was considered safe. Access to the kitchen was strictly limited. Outsiders could not simply walk in and wander among the pots and pans. The doors were guarded, and all entrances and exits were controlled by clerks. The cooks worked under the supervision of overseers, who made sure that no one added anything extra to the food. Cabinets with spices and expensive ingredients were locked, and only the head chef had the keys. Spices, due to their strong flavor and high price, were the perfect way to hide poison. Special attention was paid to sauce makers and those who prepared complex, multi-component dishes. It was easiest to dissolve poisonous powder unnoticed in liquid or mushy food. Simple pieces of roasted meat were considered safer, as they were more difficult to poison from the inside. Therefore, kings often preferred simple food when traveling or in an unreliable environment. Fear of poisoning influenced culinary preferences and banquet etiquette. Table settings also included protective elements such as the use of a unicorn horn, narwhal, which supposedly changed color when it came into contact with poison. Precious cups were often decorated with stones that were believed to have detoxifying or poison-detecting properties. Salt shakers were locked so that no one could add poison to the communal salt. Napkins and towels were checked and served in a special way to prevent contact with poison items. Even the water used to wash hands before meals was tested, as poison could penetrate the skin. The king's personal chef was one of the most trusted people in the state, and the fate of the crown depended on his loyalty. He was bribed and threatened, but his devotion had to be absolute. Betrayal by the chef was punished by the most terrible and painful death, so that others would not be tempted. The psychological tension in the kitchen due to constant checks and suspicions was enormous. Any illness of a guest after a feast caused panic and an immediate investigation, with interrogations of the staff. Cooks lived under the sword of Damocles of accusations of poisoning, even if the cause was simply stale fish. This forced them to monitor the quality and freshness of food with double diligence. The tableware for the royal table was kept in a separate room under guard, and was only brought out before the meal. After the meal, it was immediately taken away, washed, and locked up again to prevent access by intruders. Silver and gold were used not only for their beauty, but also because they were believed to react to certain poisons by darkening. The cleanliness of the tableware was literally a matter of life and death. The security system covered the entire supply chain, from farm to plate, checking suppliers and carriers. Purchases were made only from trusted individuals who had special patents and permits. A random street vendor could not sell anything to the royal kitchen. This closed ecosystem minimized risks, but could not eliminate them entirely. The shadow of poisoning always hung over the banquet table, adding a taste of danger to every sip of wine. The kitchen was not just a place for cooking, but the front line of defense for the monarch's life. In the next chapter, you will learn how they coped with the task of preserving food without refrigerators. Preserving food in the era before the invention of refrigerators was one of the most difficult logistical challenges of the castle kitchen. Fresh meat and fish began to spoil after just a few hours in the heat, so preservation methods were vital. The main preservative was salt, which was purchased in barrels and highly valued. Salting meat, fish, and vegetables allowed for the creation of stocks that could be stored for months in cool cellars. Salted meat had to be soaked in water for a long time before cooking to restore its edible taste. Smoking was the second most popular method, especially for pork and fish. Hams, sausages, and whole fish hung in huge kitchen chimneys, soaking up the aromatic smoke. The smoke not only added flavor, but also created a protective film that prevented the growth of bacteria. Smokehouses were often built directly into the structure of kitchen fireplaces, using their heat and smoke. The quality of the smoking depended on the type of wood and the skill of the smoker who monitored the process. Drying was used for fruits, mushrooms, herbs, and even some types of meat and fish. The products were laid out on racks under the roof or in special warm rooms where dry air circulated. Dried supplies were light, compact, and did not require special storage conditions except for protection from moisture. In winter, they were used to make compotes, added to soups and sauces, restoring the taste of summer. It was a simple and reliable way to preserve vitamins for the long winter. Pickling in vinegar and wine allowed vegetables, fish, and meat to be preserved, giving them a piquant taste. Vinegar was a powerful antiseptic, affordable and cheap to produce from old wine or beer. Barrels of marinades stood in cool pantries, exuding a sour aroma. Such products served as an excellent appetizer in addition to plain porridge and bread. The skill of making the right marinade was passed down from generation to generation. The use of honey and sugar for preserving fruits and berries was only available to wealthy households. Jams, jellies, and candied fruits were not just a treat, but also a way to preserve the fruit harvest. Sugar was an expensive imported commodity, so it was used sparingly and only for the most exquisite desserts. Honey, on the other hand, was a local product and was used much more widely, including for preserving nuts and berries. Sweets were stored in clay pots sealed with wax. Fat was also used as a preservative. Cooked meat was poured over with melted lard in pots. A layer of solidified fat hermetically sealed the product from air, preventing spoilage. This method, known as confit, allowed meat to remain tender and juicy for a long time. Such preparations were very high in calories and filling, which was appreciated during the cold season. Ice pits, deep pits filled with snow and ice in winter, allowed fresh produce to be stored even in summer. The walls of the ice pits were lined with straw and wood for insulation and covered with earth. Ice was harvested from rivers and lakes, cut into blocks, and transported by cart. The presence of an ice house was a sign of high status and allowed fresh fish and chilled wine to be served in the heat. This required a lot of labor to harvest the ice, but the result was worth it. Grain and flour were stored in dry, ventilated barns, protected from rodents and moisture. The grain was regularly shoveled to prevent it from clumping and spoiling. Flour was ground as needed, as it kept better and longer in grain form. Bread was baked daily, as stale bread was only used for trencher plates or animal feed. Managing grain supplies was a strategic task for the castle's survival. Live food was also a way of storage. Poultry and small livestock were kept in pens until slaughter. Fish were kept in special cages or ponds on the castle grounds and caught just before cooking. This ensured maximum freshness of the product on the Lord's table. Such live preserves required care and feeding, but they were always at hand. The battle against time was fought every day, and cooks used all their knowledge of chemistry and physics. The success of this battle determined whether the garrison would be fed in winter or face starvation. Spoiled food was an unacceptable luxury and a sign of poor performance by the kitchen clerk. Preservation was the art of prolonging the life of food for the sake of human life. Organizing a large feast was a complex logistical operation comparable to deploying troops. The work of the kitchen, cellars, bakery, and hall had to be synchronized so that hundreds of dishes appeared on the tables on time. Preparations began several weeks in advance. Food was purchased, additional staff were hired, and the menu was drawn up. Clerks calculated the number of guests and the amount of food required down to the pound. A mistake in the calculations threatened to bring shame on the host. Empty tables were unacceptable. On the day of the feast, the kitchen turned into a bustling hive of activity where everyone knew their role. Dishes were prepared in strict order, first cold appetizers, then soups, roasts, and desserts. It was necessary to calculate the time so that the hot dishes did not cool down and the cold dishes did not heat up. To achieve this, heated dishes and heat-retaining covers were used. Messengers constantly ran between the hall and the kitchen, reporting on the pace of the meal. Serving dishes in the hall was a solemn procession, strictly regulated by etiquette. Servants lined up in a chain, carrying huge dishes, led by a butler with a staff. Each dish was announced, and its delivery was accompanied by trumpet music. It was a show designed to demonstrate the wealth and generosity of the host. Cooks had to ensure that the food was beautifully arranged on the dishes, decorating it with feathers and figures. The division of tables by rank required different menus for different groups of guests. The high table on the platform received the most exquisite dishes and the best wines. The lower tables had to make do with simpler food, but it was still plentiful and satisfying. The kitchen had to prepare several menu options at the same time, without confusing who was to be served what. This required precise coordination and attentiveness from the waiters. The noise and commotion in the kitchen were unimaginable. Teams of cooks, the crackling of fire, the clattering of dishes. Managers used whistles or loud shouts to give orders in this chaos. The pace of work increased as the climax of the feast approached, and people worked to the limit of their strength. The stress and tension were enormous, but thanks to strict discipline, mistakes were rare. The huge amount of food left over after the feast also had to be managed. Some of the food was given to the servants and guards, and some was distributed to the poor at the castle gates. Nothing was thrown away just like that. It would have been wasteful and sinful. Collecting and sorting the leftovers was the responsibility of special servants called eleemosynarians. Charity was an important part of a feudal lord's image. Drinks were served from a separate room, the buffet room, but their serving had to be synchronized with the food. Cupbearers kept an eye on the filling of the cups, working closely with the kitchen. Bread cut into slices, served as plates, and was served from the pantry. All these services worked as a single mechanism of service. Cleaning up after the feast could take several days before the kitchen returned to normal. Mountains of dirty dishes, greasy tables, ashes, and trash all had to be removed and cleaned. The tired staff began cleaning up immediately after the last dishes were served. The feast was over for the guests, but not for the knife and ladle workers. The logistics of the feast were the highest level of kitchen management, testing the entire system for strength. A successful banquet strengthened the lord's political ties and raised the status of his house. Failure could lead to diplomatic complications and ridicule. The kitchen was a political tool, no less important than the army or diplomacy. Each feast was a small war won by the sweat and blood of the kitchen workers. Their invisible feat made the splendor of the medieval court possible. And behind all this was not only muscle power, but also the power of the organizers' minds. Working in a medieval kitchen carried a silent but deadly threat, invisible to the eye. Inadequate ventilation and the huge amount of fuel burned led to the accumulation of carbon monoxide. This gas was colorless and odorless, but it slowly poisoned people, causing headaches, weakness, and fainting. Cooks who spent hours at the hearth were constantly exposed to toxic combustion products. Chronic poisoning was a common occupational hazard. Soot and carbon deposits settled in the lungs, causing severe respiratory diseases and coughing. Light cooks were black from years of smoke inhalation, like miners. Doctors of the time could do little to help, blaming it all on bad air. Ventilation lights on the roof helped, but did not completely solve the problem during intensive cooking. In winter, when the windows were closed, the concentration of smoke became critical. Heat stroke was another common problem in the hot kitchen. The temperature near the stoves could reach levels incompatible with normal bodily function. Dehydration set in quickly, and people lost consciousness right at their workplaces. They were dragged aside, doused with water, and, if they regained consciousness, returned to work. Heat tolerance was the main criterion for professional suitability. Eyes suffered from constant irritation from smoke and heat, and many older cooks became partially blind. Watery eyes interfered with work, but protective goggles did not exist at that time. Inflammation and conjunctivitis were chronic conditions for most kitchen workers. They washed their eyes with herbal infusions, but this provided only temporary relief. Vision was sacrificed for the sake of culinary art. Heavy physical exertion led to problems with the spine and joints. Hernias, sciatica, and arthritis were constant companions of those who carried heavy pots and carcasses. By old age, many kitchen workers became disabled, unable to straighten their backs. There was no social security, and their fate depended on the mercy of the Lord. Despite all these horrors, there were always many people who wanted to work in the kitchen. Guaranteed food outweighed the health risks in times of famine. People consciously traded their health for food and the safety of the castle walls. It was a cruel but rational choice for a medieval person. Invisible enemies killed slowly, not as spectacularly as a sword or the plague, But the mortality statistics among kitchen staff were depressing. The kitchen drained the life force of its servants drop by drop. And yet it was a place where life in all its manifestations was in full swing.
See how the blade parts the joint.
The kitchen was not only a place of hard labor, but also a unique social ladder. In a rigidly structured feudal society, it was one of the few places where talent was valued above origin. A simple peasant's son, starting out cleaning pots, could rise to become head chef through diligence and talent. This position brought privileges, wealth, and influence that his ancestors could not have dreamed of. A successful chef became a confidant of the king, privy to the secrets of the court. Masters of the culinary arts received generous gifts, land grants, and even noble titles. Monarchs poached them from each other, offering fabulous sums of money for their services. The names of great chefs, such as Guillaume Tirel, Taillon, went down in history alongside those of military commanders. They wrote cookbooks that became bestsellers of their time. A chef's fame was a reflection of his master's fame. The influence of cuisine on politics was indirect but significant. A good dinner could soften the heart of an ambassador. Diplomatic negotiations were often conducted at the table, and food was a tool of persuasion. The chef was a co-author of political victories, creating an atmosphere for successful dialogue. An unsuccessful dish, on the contrary, could spoil the monarch's mood and lead to war. The responsibility rested on the shoulders of the person who composed the menu. The kitchen was a separate world with its own laws, court, and traditions, closed to outsiders. Dynasties of chefs were formed here, passing on the secrets of their craft from father to son. Knowledge of spices, sauces, and techniques was capital that was carefully guarded. It was a craft guild, strong in its unity and professionalism. Within this world, it was possible to have a brilliant career. However, the fall from this peak could be rapid and painful. Losing the Lord's favor meant the end of one's career and often poverty. Cooks who fell out of favor lived out their days in obscurity, unless they had managed to amass a fortune. The risk was high, but the reward was great, which attracted ambitious people. The kitchen beckoned with opportunities for those who were not afraid of fire and hard work. Many used kitchen service as a springboard for their children, providing them with education and connections. A former cook could open his own tavern or become an estate manager. The management, logistics, and accounting skills acquired in the royal kitchen were universal. It was a school of life that produced tough and effective managers. The prestige of the profession changed over time, but the role of the cook always remained key in the castle. Without him, the castle was just a pile of stones, and the lord was a hungry man. The kitchen provided energy for life, war, and love. It was the heart that pumped blood through the veins of the feudal system, and those who controlled this heart kept their finger on the pulse of the era. The history of medieval kitchens is a story of how human genius overcame the limitations of nature. It is a monument to the nameless workers who fed history. Their sweat and labor became the foundation of European food culture. And today we use many of their inventions without even realizing it. We went from the bottom to the top of the hierarchy, seeing the kitchen from the inside. It was a complex, dangerous, but incredibly important world. A world where fire and stone, water and metal served man, and where man performed the feat of survival every day. What struck you most about the structure of a medieval kitchen? The engineering solutions or the strict hierarchy of the staff? Would you like to see a video about what exactly was cooked in these giant kitchens and which recipes have survived to this day? Write your suggestions in the comments and we will definitely make a video about it. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on this dive into the history of taste.